am here with my buddy Nick Ward. Nick, thank you for actually doing the very first interview we're recording for Stones and Shoes here on YouTube. Before we get started, obviously our topic today, as the listeners or watchers can see by the title, we're going to be talking about miracle stories. And
Hmm.
I figured there's no one better to do this topic with than Nick, because Nick has had plenty of years and experiences doing ministry, doing evangelism. Nick, could you go ahead and give me a brief overview of your story, why you do ministry, just kind of give whoever's listening a bit of a background, to, understand where you are coming from in the first place.
Yeah, I'd love to. And again, thank you for letting me be on the podcast, Noah. It's a blessing to know you and to be your friend.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
so for me, I did not want to be a Christian. Um, I was not convinced about this. I grew up in private schools, so I went to church more than the pastor. I was at a private school
Mm,
which was my church 5 days a week. Went back on Sunday and on Wednesday night. So technically, I went 7 times a week and
mm,
was not particularly convinced about it myself. I think if you had asked me, I maybe
mm,
had said I believed in God, but looking back, I don't think I knew what that would mean.
mm,
Um, my freshman year of college, I was rather interested in a young lady, and we ended up going to a couple of spiritual groups, one of which was, I
mm,
found out later, a cult, but who nonetheless read the Bible with me. And um, what happened to me was that I was reading about Jesus for the first time and had never really read about Jesus personally before, but found myself very compelled by the kind of person that Jesus seemed to be. Um, and if I was honest, I felt that perhaps if he was a real kind of person, a real person, not just a character in a book, he might be the exact kind of person I might need to know and come in contact with because I needed a lot of help in life. And lo and behold, one night, before I was about to join this cult, I prayed, which I hadn't done very much of. I did not believe in God necessarily. I think it said something like, "If there's a God and He does hear me, um, and there is something here for me in Jesus. I would ask that you show me the way here, because I was going to join this group. And what happened next was kind of the beginning of the end for me. I had a very tangible, real, powerful experience of being in the presence of Jesus. There was no lights, no smoke machines, no visions. It just felt like the Jesus I was reading about walked out of the pages of the scriptures into my car, which is where I was praying, and I was in the presence of somebody who genuinely loved me, knew everything I had done, wanted the best for me, and had shown me that he himself was the way I was praying for. As later on, Jesus, I'd come to learn, would say, I am the way, the truth, the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. And I experienced that entry. A lot of people stay at the gate and debate about how you get in, but I had actually gone in and experienced this, which I was not seeking to experience. And at that very moment, I decided I was going to follow Jesus at all costs because it was worth it to me. He was worth it to me. So that's how I became a Christian. I started doing ministry, evangelism at a place called Cal State Fullerton, which was the university I was attending. And I wasn't doing it very good, but I can tell you this, I did it honestly. And I ended up reading a lot of the Bible in a very short amount of time and coming to a lot of convictions about God that I found and I still find are very precious to me. Um, And during the course of that time, I came across some mentors who decided to, what we would call in the Christian faith, disciple somebody, which just means they're bringing them along as an apprentice to teach them and show them how to follow Jesus in real time, not by explanation of a book, but rather, come follow me, I'll show you what it looks like. And I had some really great people that have done that for me. And so now as a pastor, I'm a pastor for people who don't go to church mostly. I love being with people like myself who have great reasons to not go to church, who may not find any value in church, who don't go to church or don't want to or don't know about that kind of thing, but are genuinely still spiritual beings that care and are interested in the questions facing our everyday existence of life, meaning, purpose, and values. So I love doing that. I love interfaith dialogue. I got my degree in religious studies from Cal State. I'm happy to hear other people's very disagreeable with my own viewpoint, and I respect people and hope that I can have more conversations um, like that every day I can. So I'm not threatened. I don't feel worried about having someone converse with me who doesn't believe those things that I believe. I remember once I did not believe these things either. So I very well remember what that was like and can respect that.
Mm, yes. Well, thank you for that introduction. That's actually how Nick and I met. I think it was something along the lines of, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then, or me saying, "Hey," or I think it was you, Nick, saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I think we're doing the same thing right now on this campus." And so, it's it's funny to look back only a year and a half ago. Feels like I've known you a bit longer, actually. Over how many years exactly have you been doing this whole thing for in terms of discipleship, disciple making?
Mm. Well, the moment that I crossed that threshold of following Jesus, that was the moment I said, I'm going to do this stuff
Hmm.
too, because um, part of me, I instinctively knew from reading what I was reading, there's no way you're going to say you're going to become a follower of Jesus and not do the things that he did,
Mm.
which primarily was walking around, talking to people, and sharing um, about God. And I didn't know how to do that, but I knew that that was in the bucket, so to speak.
Hmm.
If I was going to drink, the whole Kool-Aid on Jesus, I was getting that part too. So, and I
Hmm.
wanted that. That's what happened. That's what I wished I had more of. So I've been doing that since 2012.
Hmm.
It's December of 2012, so it's coming up on my, I
Hmm.
think my 12th year anniversary of
Yep,
of
12 years.
coming to have known Jesus and start following him. And I can tell you,
Mm.
I'm not a man who's great at making commitments. At least I
Mm.
wasn't before Jesus. So the fact that I've stuck with anything for 12 years is amazing to me. Um, so yeah, 12 years it's been, and that was when I had also started doing
Mm.
the evangelism ministry that I was doing.
Mm. And so this segues us actually into the topic, which is miracle stories, um, as you could say. So I guess, before, I have you share some of the stories that, I've already heard some of them, but I actually, I'm really excited to hear them again and maybe even hear some new ones. What is a miracle, and why should we care? Why should someone who maybe isn't a believer care? Why should it
Hmm.
matter to the Christian? I on my end, I would say, listening to stories of, hearing about something that God did where it's, hard to deny that there wasn't, supernatural intervention. It definitely fortifies our faith as believers, and it can definitely strengthen and encourage us. But what else is there for those listening? Why should they care to hear these
Hmm.
stories in the first place?
Yeah, I'm grateful for that question because in reality, I'm sure there's many of you who are listening that have heard that term miracle tossed around, probably sometimes in circles that are more or less not as reasonable, maybe by your deduction. Maybe they don't think
Hmm.
about these types of things.
Hmm.
For me, I'm a very skeptical person when it comes to miraculous things.
Hmm.
And so a miracle, properly understood, is really just something that has occurred, which just shouldn't. The natural laws of physics and of life as we know it would say that a certain outcomes are just not possible or entirely, if not entirely improbable, almost entirely improbable. And that probably break what we know is true. And the reason I think that people should be interested in that is there's actually three reasons I would give you. The first reason would be one, if they're real, they demand attention. If
Hmm.
there is, in essence, an opportunity for God to, if he is real, subvert natural laws to do extraordinary things, I should think we would want, I think that we find that probably to be more preferable than not, if that is true. In other
Hmm.
words, if life goes on the exact way it tends to go,
Hmm.
that's option A, or life could maybe not go the way it's intended to go for the
Hmm.
benefit of someone else. I would probably pick option B, that miracles exist. So I think they're interesting. They should be of interest because one, if they're real, then I think we'd probably prefer that reality,
Hmm.
if we're honest. Two, um, there has been no shortage of uh, scholarship done on what has become known as the New Testament, the document that has become the New Testament, which is itself a lot of other documents. These
Hmm.
documents, which show high historical reliability from a number of different fields of scholarship, not all are Christian,
Hmm.
seem to suggest that the eyewitness accounts given in them are credible. And so, um, if it's true that miracles exist, not only just for the benefit, if they're true in and of themselves, ought we to be kind of people interested in facts and not fiction?
Mm,
Um, I think it's not an exercise of futility or logical futility to consider whether something's miraculous. What is actually unreasonable is denying that reality off the set without any reason to believe that. That is
mm,
literally someone who does that without reason. That is unreasonable. We
mm,
have good reasons to believe that these things did either at one point exist or continue to exist. So if someone is interested in truth and facts, I think that they'll find themselves in great supply when they think about miracles from a historic perspective as it
mm,
regards the New Testament. But the
mm,
third reason I think is the most important,
mm,
and that is that miracles necessarily show the evidence of a God or a power beyond us that
mm,
is concerned with
mm,
everyday life. It's one thing to believe that things go the way that they go and there's a God but doesn't care or cannot get
mm,
involved. But the fact that miracles occur would seem to
mm,
indicate the opposite. There's a God that is here and is concerned and cares and can do something about it.
mm,
That in itself is a very important reason why I
mm,
think that we ought to think about miracles at some
mm,
level. Clearly, the people that Jesus did them to did not anticipate them, and probably
mm,
for many of them did not think that they were ever going to see one. I think about the man,
mm,
I believe it is in John
mm,
5, who sits by a body of water for, I think
mm,
it is up to 30 years, who, more or less is waiting for a miracle, and
mm,
Jesus comes and performs one. Uh, that to me shows the kind of God that could exist, not just the evidence, but the
mm,
kind of God is present, available, compassionate, caring, and involved, and
mm,
and will even move natural laws
mm,
for us. Grains of dust that we
mm.
are. That's incredible. That
Right.
shows what kind of God we believe in. So those are three reasons uh, I think that this is a worthy conversation.
Mm. So, what I'm hearing is not only do miracles convey, the theistic worldview, but also the character of that God, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so so obviously if there could be miracles that you could think of that could that you could almost make up in your mind that would convey that God is maybe even impersonal, right? Like the only way he chose to reveal himself, let's say, was by putting on a light show every night or by doing something, I don't know, you name it, something ridiculous that doesn't actually have any, true meaning to it other than
Right.
God's just showing, oh, I exist. But there's
Exist.
nothing there's no substance to that, right? So
Yeah.
there's also, if there is a God, right, what's his character like? And that's something that you're saying miracles also
Yeah.
will convey to us.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm,
And I think also it's important to say this for your listeners who are
mm,
interested in the biblical worldview. The biblical worldview is steeped in an idea of the gods. There's a pantheon of Greek gods that interact with one another.
mm,
And those gods are very temperamental and may just blow you up for fun. They might flex a muscle, throw a couple light
mm,
shows. What's interesting about almost every miracle in the Bible is they stand to benefit the human being involved.
mm,
Every single one of them are an act of compassionate care. Um, and so, far be it from God just to say, well, I want to remind everybody I'm God, so let me flex a muscle or two. Uh,
mm,
Most of these miracles we read about in the biblical account, as opposed to the ancient Greek pantheons and the things that were done there, these are interestingly and most notably characterized by compassion to very vulnerable and sometimes very undeserving
mm,
kinds of groups of people. And
mm,
so I find those to be compelling reasons as
mm,
well. And like as you said, if someone's real and out there just putting on a spectacle, it's not for entertainment. It always
mm,
has purpose towards the human preservation and continuance of human
mm,
life, as you see in the Bible.
mm. Okay, well, we've been talking up, the whole miracle game. I think
Yeah,
it's time now that we actually hear a few personal
yeah,
miracles that you've experienced firsthand.
sure,
They could also include encounters with demonic beings, angelic beings, of course.
sure.
I know that there's a lot of really interesting research and scholarship done surrounding near-death experiences. I don't know if we're gonna cover that. I don't think you've ever died before, Nick.
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of myself either. I don't think I've ever had a near-death experience, but go ahead,
Yeah.
share some stories you have.
Well, I have one story that I tell a lot of people was the first time I believe God showed me that He
Hmm.
listened to prayer. I was a young man, still around 2012. It was about 2013, I think. I was sick. I was at home. I had previously had engagements with a group of homeless people down in Anaheim who lived by La Palma Park.
Hmm.
And I was homesick. I didn't have any money in my bank account. I had just started a new job working there in Anaheim. And I got a call from a friend, a homeless friend, who said, it's been raining on us, and it had been raining at the time. It was cold and flu season. Um, do you think you could bring us 5 tarps and 5 blankets? And I just felt immediately overwhelmed. Even though I personally did not have those things, I thought, well, surely there's something in our attic or something we could find that we could help. And I didn't. I began to pray because I said, God, I don't have this kind of resource. I don't have any money to even buy these things. We don't have them in our house. And before I could finish that prayer, he called me again and said, Nick, I want to apologize. We actually need 10 tarps. We need 10 blankets. And I thought, oh, great. Now I'm going to have to let this guy down even worse. And so I started to pray. I said, God, it says in the Bible that you care about the poor. It says that you answer prayer. It says that you are willing to do things for people who believe you, especially if we're taking care of them. And I want to help my friends, but I don't have any money and I don't have anything that I can do. I have a car. I'm ready to go if you can give me something here. And before I finished that prayer, he called me a third time and said, Nick, I need to apologize to you again. We need 20 tarps and we need 20 blankets. And I just thought, do I tell him now that I don't have any of these things, or do I let him keep calling me and doubling everything every 5 minutes? Well, I was overwhelmed. My heart was really moved. I could tell they were in some need. And so I called my wife, who was then my girlfriend, who was also sick and at home. And I said, look, I need you to pray with me because these friends of ours are going to get colds and they're exposed. It's very rainy. We don't have any of these resources. I don't have any money. You don't have any money. Let's pray and just see what happens. So, and I put it on Facebook. I said, if there's anybody out there that happens to have resources like this, let me know. And I didn't think anything of it. So I get a phone call from a friend of mine. I met him one time in San Francisco. We had exchanged numbers. We were serving the homeless there. This was like way before, this is the only time we've talked since then. He says, Nick, you're not going to believe it, but in Orange at my church, somebody dropped off 20 tarps yesterday, and we've been wondering what to do about these things. And I saw your Facebook post and I thought, oh my gosh, this is for you. They were dropped off for you. I got so excited. I called my wife. I said, you're not going to believe this. And so I told her, and then she said, well, you're not going to believe this. When I was praying, I felt, for whatever reason, I felt led to go to a part of my room. She had just moved and hadn't unpacked everything, or at least she had moved prior and hadn't been finished unpacking everything. I went in this drawer and I found this $100 bill in my drawer. And I remembered my grandfather had given it to me and said, use this for other people. And as I was praying and I remembered where this was, I got it and I thought maybe God wants us to use this. So this was it within 5 minutes of the last prayer that I prayed after the man had called me and told me for 20 tarps, 20 tents, or 20 tarps and 20 blankets. So I was overwhelmed. I thought, wow, 5 minutes ago I had 0 tarps, zero money. I've gone to 20 tarps and $100. So I tell Jamie, I said, okay, we got to do this. I know we're both sick. It'll be a fun day. We're going to get in my car. We're going to go down to Orange, pick up these tarps. We'll figure out what to do with this $100. Maybe we can buy blankets. So we go there. We get the tarps. They fit perfectly in my car. And then I asked the pastor, hey, we need to find, you wouldn't have to have 20 blankets on you, would you? And he goes, no, but, if you go to all these thrift shops here in Orange, I bet you guys could get more than what you need with that $100. So we go around, sure enough, down the street, a few minutes down. We were able to pick out 15 different blankets. We went to the next thrift store, got another 5. We had $30 left over. And so we start heading to the side. I'm like, oh my gosh, this was only an hour ago. I had none of these resources And all of a sudden, I prayed this specific prayer with a few others. And here we are sitting in my car on the way to meet this need we had no money and no ability to address. I was genuinely in awe, and I was rubbing my nose every 5 seconds because I was all snotty and gross. But Jamie and I were just elated. Well, I have neglected to mention to you what became to me the most moving part of this. Months prior, I had met a man, and it was in an off chance. I took a walk in the middle of the night. I met this skateboarding guy, and he said, "I never skate this way. I always go the opposite way. Maybe we're supposed to talk." It was a very random encounter, a divine encounter indeed. And he was a struggling Christian. And I had told him about how I had done some homeless ministry, and I had forgotten that he at one point had texted me and had left a box of clothes. He had children that they no longer fit and had left it next to the side of my house. They had been, I had put them in my car. My mother was always saying to move them, so I just put them in my car before I did anything. I forgot I'd put them in there. And we arrived on site, uh, and we passed out every tarp, we passed out every blanket, and a woman comes up to me and says, "Excuse me," she's a homeless woman who has children. "Do you have anything for children with you?" And I hadn't remembered that I had this box in my car, so it strikes me, there it is, this giant cubicle box. It's just become a part of my car. I don't think about it anymore. I just haven't moved it anywhere. And I open it up again, and there were sizes for each of her children in there. And she and I both just cried because I told her the story. I said I wasn't even supposed to have this box in my car, supposed to move it. We had passed out everything, and this woman got all of these things for her children. Mind you, this is all within 1 hour. Um, it was pretty overwhelming. And someone else had asked if we had had any more resources. They needed a piece of electrical equipment. We were able to go to a Goodwill right there on site and use the last of our $100 to buy this for them. Everything just aligned so incredibly perfectly that I had to conclude there's no way that this just was coincidence. It's yes, you put something on Facebook, yes, you have this, but what are the chances that all of these things come into line in such a time? All these different variables align, and within an hour, everything has been resolved in such a way. In spite of me, of course, who forgot half the resources that he had anyway. To me, this is a very powerful story of what God was like and how God takes care of vulnerable people. But it also showed me God answers prayer, and from that day forward, I knew we need to pray a lot more because when we pray, and by the way, that was 11 years ago. We've prayed many other such prayers, and I can hardly think of a time where we prayed a very specific prayer like that it was not answered in such a way. Um, and so that's a true story that I could definitely share with you to encourage you. If maybe you're listening and there's a pressing need about you right now that's not your own, I would encourage you. You have nothing to lose by experimenting and trying this out and saying, God, I don't know if you're there, but I would love it if you would show me who you are by taking care of this person in this specific way. Why don't you ask him and find out?
Mm,
I can't control that. Nobody here can control that, but God can control that if he is real.
And some you actually recently shared a story with me. I don't know if you want to briefly touch on it, but you now have
Sure.
this increasing confidence that when you pray for something oddly specific, but out of a heart of service to other people, you actually recently told me a story where you were
Yeah.
confident and something very
Yes.
particular happened. I don't want to spoil the story, but
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if you were planning on sharing this one, but this one
Yeah.
you recently told me, and I was quite astonished.
It,
And I think this is also it'd be another encouraging one to share.
Definitely. Yeah. So I was with a good friend of mine who is coming to know Jesus. And we've been working out, and our story in itself is a miracle, but I don't have time to tell that. We were working out at the gym and we were talking about a scripture and particularly anxiety. And he was wondering, his question was, how are we supposed to handle our anxieties with God? How do we do that? And I had related to him that there's a passage in the Bible that Jesus speaks about in Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus talks about anxiety. And more than just giving reasons not to worry, one of my favorite things Jesus does, he tells you what to do, how to spend your energy anyways. And he says, seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And he looked at me and said, so what does that really mean? How does one really do that? And I ended up telling him a story, which I thought would be applicable, describing how to do that. And as we were walking out of the gym, I just felt, no, that's just not good enough. I just need to show him. There has to be a way to show him. And I just felt very emboldened in that moment. There was a store next to our gym, and he said he needed to go into it. I was originally going to depart, go in my car, go back home. Well, he did that. And I said, friend, I'm going to show you something right now. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to pray right now, and we're going to see God show you what the kingdom of God looks like. And he was more than a little interested. And so I said, God, we're going to walk into that store right there. And I would like you to give us an opportunity to specifically bless somebody in there. Give us an opportunity to bless somebody in a way that shows that you're listening to this prayer. To my friend who's listening. Amen. And he goes, all right, well, let's see what happens. So we walk in, and he doesn't find what he's looking for. I find a small book. I go, well, I kind of do want to buy this book. It's cheap. It's $2, so let's go. I go to the counter. I'm scanning the wrong barcode. There's like 3 barcodes on it. It's like discounted. So of course, one of the people over there who deals with people like me, who can't scan a book, comes over. Oh, hi there, sir. What are you trying to do? Okay, let me get that. And I wanted to thank her. So I said, what's your name? And she said, well, my name is this. And I said, that's a lovely name. I've never heard someone named what your name. I'm trying to protect her privacy in that way. And she said, "Oh, it's actually not my real name." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, and she had said it in such a way that I thought, I want to ask about this. And the whole time in the store, I'm thinking, okay, God, you better show up. And I'd relented and finally gone to the checkers counter going, well, you haven't given us any opportunity. I guess I'm just going to have to trust you on this one. And here's this woman telling me, she says, well, my name is, and I feel fine showing her real name because she doesn't actually have this posted on her name tag. She says, my name is actually just spelled in such a way nobody can really say it out loud. I said, well, what does your name sound like? She said, well, it's my. Like I'm like my tie or my possessive. Yeah, it's my. I said, well, so why is that so hard to pronounce? Well, it's the way it's spelled. Okay, well, how's it spelled? She says, well, it's Migh. I thought, well, that's really interesting. Can I ask you why it is your parents named you that? They surely have told you. She said, well, actually, my full name is My Testimony. And I said, I'm sorry, come again? And my friend's looking over at me. His jaw's dropped because he has begun to listen to our conversation. My name is My Testimony because God, when I was born, I was supposed to be aborted. But a woman came up to my mother and said, you're not going to abort your baby. I'm going to pray for you and you're going to change your mind. The lady didn't believe her. She stayed in line for 10 minutes. And sure enough, at the end of that 10 minutes, the lady came back and said, have you changed your mind? And the woman said, I actually have. And her mother named her My Testimony because this is her testimony that God didn't change her mind until the very last second. And this young woman's name I'm speaking to is My Testimony. It gets crazier. So I said, well, My Testimony, how can my friend and I be praying for you? She looks us dead in the face and says, every single day when I pray, I think a lot about my anxieties. I like this verse from Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus talks about seeking first the kingdom of God. And I look over, and my friend and I are looking at each other, and he's about ready to accuse me of planting this person here. And I'm about ready to accuse him of planting this person here. And I said, just to be sure, you and I haven't met before, right? She goes, no, this is our first time meeting. I said, well, you're not going to believe this, but what you just described to us as your verse has been the exact verse we were talking about in the gym, which has brought us to this moment. We were all three floored, and we ended up praying for her. We walked out, and my friend looked at me. He could barely get a word out and said, this is real. He's real. And I said, yeah. And now you have to wrestle with the existential dread of that. Goodbye. And he got in his car, and I got in my car, and we left. And it's a story. It's very recent, about less than a month ago. We still talk about it. And I haven't gone back in to visit My Testimony, but I think I might and say, hey, you made a podcast. But it's stories like that I just can't deny. There are too many factors for me in the production of awe it gave to all three of us about God and the way He works. It's I'm sorry, but as the late Archbishop of Canterbury said, he says, I don't know if I believe in prayer, but I know when I pray, a lot more coincidences happen. And this was just one of those things I couldn't deny. It was a real story that just happened to me.
Now, I know this is a whole other topic of discussion, but it does seem to me, from what I've overheard from other people, is it miracles and, seeing things that you can't really explain naturalistically do tend to happen more in, you know, third world countries or countries or more developing countries. I think that's the more politically correct way of saying it.
Well, let me start by saying this. This is a question for a lot of American Christians. How come we do not see some of the things we've heard happen in other countries? And I want to say two things to that before I tell you a story.
Hmm.
One is the greatest miracle that God regularly performs is the one where somebody who is dead in their sins comes back to life spiritually by being born again
Hmm.
through their faith in Jesus Christ. Physical resurrections, guess what? That person will die again. But in the spiritual resurrection of a human being, which happens when people preach the gospel and people accept it, God is already doing that miracle many times over. So I always encourage my friends, the most amazing miracle that we're ever going to meet is another person in the way that God's changed their life. Physical healing, sometimes we put them up here, or demonic exorcisms, and we put them in a place where if we actually evaluate what Jesus says when his disciples come back and say, "Good news, the demons even obey when we command them to leave." He says, "I'm telling you something even greater." Is that your name is written in the book of life? What does that mean? They've become followers of him. That's the greatest miracle that can truly occur. And Americans have seen these and sometimes are those miracles. So that's the first thing I want to say. Second, what I love
Hmm.
about God in the Bible is God is genuinely interested in interacting with the diversity of cultures that exist on the face of the earth. And one of the most obvious ones we read about is the Egyptian culture. Now, how did God perform miracles there? What's really interesting, because there's different accounts of this. In Exodus, of course, you could read the accounts of the 10 plagues. But in the Psalms, you could read another account of those plagues, wherein it doesn't say that God did miracles. It says God judged the Egyptians gods. That is, the 10 different plagues God chose to do showed that he was really the one in charge of things which they had allocated to other deities. The Egyptians had gods for everything, gods for cattle. The Nile was thought itself to be a god. Pharaoh was thought to be a god. These different gods, according to the Egyptian cosmogonies, were the ones really in charge. Well, it wasn't that God just thought, what's a fancy way to get these people out of here? God was in the business of showing who exactly is God and what he is like. And the 10 plagues were not only demonstrations of his power, but of the fact that he truly was the one true God. Now, in other cultures which have this polytheistic worldview, we hear lots of accounts of God doing very similar things, showing where healing really comes from. And I'll share about that in a second. But I don't find it bothersome at all that God doesn't do some of those things in greater capacity here, though they do seem to happen here. He does them elsewhere because he's fitting the bill of where those people are at and showing who really is God in those places where polytheism still dominates. Whereas, of course, in the United States, that's not a dominant worldview, so to speak. So
Hmm.
that's just two small notes I wanted to add
Hmm.
before I tell a
Can
story.
I actually, when before you tell the story, something I'd add on to is I think um, in our Western mindset where, we're raised to think very naturalistically, it's something that's it almost feels, intrinsic to us, with at least from what I've experienced personally and growing up in, public school system and, naturalism is the only proposed theory as to why
Right.
everything exists in the first place.
Sure.
Creationism is not something that's even mentioned as a possibility to begin with. You only
Right.
hear about it, in Sunday school and church or,
Yeah.
in the more, Christian environment. But something tells me too that obvious miracles that God could perform to, maybe prove himself to a non-believer or to, reveal himself, it probably would almost be dismissed as a mere coincidence or something that can be explained naturalistically, regardless of how miraculous the event actually is.
Correct.
I mean, that's exactly what happened, after Jesus rose from the dead and the rumor spread amongst, the Jews that was it the swoon theory that was the first one proposed, right?
The
That
first theory
his
was the
body was
stolen
stolen.
body.
The stolen
Yes.
body.
Yeah.
Okay, the stolen body theory.
Yeah.
Um, so of course, people will always immediately rush to that naturalistic explanation. I think it's like a compass, where the needle always points to the naturalistic explanation you always want to. And sometimes, that is for a good reason. Obviously, you don't just want anyone to show up and say, I've received a revelation or I've, experienced this amazing miracle, and maybe it's something that maybe contradicts a biblical worldview and what they present. Of course, there are instances where you should be skeptical, but I think we are so anti-supernatural anything ever happening at all that I don't that's just something that I would mention about why we often
Yes.
don't experience things
Well,
here.
naturalism is in itself a miracle. For the entire history of the world, no one has believed such a philosophy could ever be true. And
Mm,
there are no real naturalists. Nobody
mm,
actually lives as a naturalist. People may
mm.
profess to be one, but in their actual everyday life, they deny the tenets of their naturalism.
Sure,
That's from a complete philosophical
sure.
worldview. But it's
Mm,
ironic that it's a miracle that naturalism exists, because for the last a few thousands of years, no one would ever make up such an idea,
mm,
because
yeah.
the bulk of the world has understood
Mm,
something which is actually true about God, which is that
mm,
there's more to life than what we see.
mm,
And naturalism is self-defeating in that it posits that naturalism, according to its logical conclusion, naturalism doesn't actually exist because things which are not provable cannot exist. Naturalism is a philosophy, an ideology which we cannot prove exists. So,
mm,
now, from a completely logical point of view, none of those philosophies, which ironically come to the conclusion that there's, only natural things exist, can actually prove their own ideology from the same exact presuppositions. So
mm,
it's logically and reasonably self-defeating, and it's also ironically a miracle that humans could
mm,
ever conceive of such a thing, since the
mm,
bulk of 99.99% of the world has never espoused anything close to naturalism. Yeah, no, the naturalist has nothing going for them in terms of science, philosophy, reason, or logic, unfortunately. But that actually serves to show that the biblical worldview is more plausible, because the biblical worldview doesn't say people don't believe things because they aren't educated enough. It says people don't believe certain things because it would implicate them
mm,
as being irresponsible. And so, blinding ourselves, we call ourselves wise, and we exchange the truth of God for a lie, according to Romans 1. I
mm,
actually find practically the biblical view on anthropology, human beings, is much more consistent with an everyday experience of humans. Most people are not persuaded by good evidence. It's when their desires are to see truth itself, that's when they begin to learn what is true. Unless their desires say it's more expedient for me this not be true, then I'll try to find good justifications why I dismiss it. That's everybody. That's every person I've ever met, including myself, at some
mm.
point. So,
Yeah. We
so
did a good job
ironically,
of going down a rabbit hole in the midst of your stories, but so
yes,
I will steer us back on track, although
steer
I
us
did
back
love that discussion. Um, so I think you were just about
to
maybe,
tell
I
you a
don't know, 10
story.
minutes ago to tell another
Yes.
story. Go ahead and have at it, Nick.
Oh, I think that the most credible way to report a miracle is to have been a first-hand participant in that. I think that that's a level of credibility, and I have seen that overseas in a closed country in Nepal. My wife asked me on my missions trip to Nepal, "What's one thing you would like me to pray about you doing over there?" And I said, I would like to, and I don't know why I said this. I said, I'd like to be a part of a genuine exorcism. Because in Nepal, and in places like Nepal, where Buddhism and Hinduism is supreme, we find there are higher levels of animistic, or you might call them witch doctor, witchcraft kind of religions. They're all boiled down to a couple of the same tenets. But I said I would really like to be involved in a real exorcism of a real person who's genuinely demonically possessed. And and so when I was there in Nepal, I was in a village, and this was a rather interesting thing that occurred. I saw this, I participated in this, and I did it with along with 30 others who happened to be pastors in this region. There was a woman. We went into a village to ask how we can pray for them because this village was recently being shared. People were sharing the gospel with, but it was a very hostile village. It didn't want to hear the gospel, but a few people did, and they gathered at this one person's house. This woman came forward, and we asked her, "What would you like prayer for?" And as soon as we had asked, her eyes rolled back up into her head, and she began to thrash around and try to hit and harm us, such that she needed to be restrained by one of the people that was there. And what I witnessed was really this. This woman went into a different state or trance, and what it appeared to be, she appeared to be very animistic, very much like an animal. This was a woman who wanted prayer, who came to our prayer meeting, and all of a sudden she's saying these interesting things. My translator was actually translating the things that she was saying, or whatever was in her was saying. It was saying things like, "I would like a sacrifice. I would like blood. Sacrifice to me." Um, and so we prayed, and we cast out the demon in Jesus's name. We just prayed over her, and the first demon came out. And how we knew is she had come back to her senses. She didn't understand what had just happened. Now, what's really important to mention here is, in an agricultural and an agrarian society in a village like this, a person who has these symptoms is not somebody you do business with. It's not somebody you go near. It's not something you would yourself do to get more clout, as it were, or respect from people. The whole village was gathered at our door watching this happen. For a woman to choose to have done this was not in her best interest if she had chosen it. And to me, her returning to sanity for a brief few moments, as I'll tell you the rest of the story, she was unaware of what had happened. People said that people who were not Christians had said she's been having bouts like this where she's become very violent, has started speaking in very weird ways. And so we had deduced, oh, she must be demonically possessed. It wasn't the first thing we came up with. But when non-Christian villagers are telling you something seems to be living in her that's not her, you start listening to things like that. Well, we had gone back to her house because the pastors had said, "Do you have any idols in your home? Any foreign deities in your home?" And she said, "We don't think so, but I'd like you to come and look." And on the way there, what happened was she fell down again on the ground, and then this time she started slithering like a snake. And I even said to my translator, I said, do you think this is real? She seems to be like she's playing the part of a snake. He stopped what I was saying, pointed over into the distance, and said, "Do you see that temple? That's the temple of this village for the last 1,000 years. What is seated atop on that temple?" And sure enough, it was a snake. He said, "This is the god Sunkar. Sunkar is a snake god." And we found that when we are dealing with demonic possession, these are local Nepalese, that when we are dealing with them, if there's a temple in that town, the demonic possessions that happen often emulate whatever animal is atop the temple in that town. And so we prayed over her again and cast that demon out. It was a different demon. It manifested in a different way. She wasn't violent. She was clearly in a different state. And after that, no more problems. So, and then the whole village came together to listen to us share about the good news of what had happened. Now, the story has a really interesting ending. Um, we hadn't even begun to preach. We'd gone to the village to pray and to preach, but this was before we had even preached. And a number of the young men had gathered around us with the rest of the village to hear what we were going to say after watching these two things happen. So some of us got up to preach. I got up as well to preach the good news. And I preached about how sometimes God has been mistaken for other things. Sometimes we mistake other things for God and we worship them accordingly. We should not do that because they defile the character of God. And these men didn't like hearing that. And so they had banded up and told us, "You must leave our village." Not everybody wanted us to do that. Many of the older, more respectable elders of the town said, "We would like to continue to hear you about this." Now, here's what happens next. They surround us. They want to throw us out of their town. And I look to my friend, who's really the Nepalese pastor who started these churches. "What are we going to do?" He said, "Oh, we're going to go have lunch, then we'll come back." So I said, "Okay." So we go have lunch, we come back, we go to the market. And sitting there in the market is a man. This man is the Hindu priest for this temple. And I was really struck because I thought that maybe he was with these young men that didn't want us there, who said, we're going to continue to worship these gods no matter what you tell us. But not that was not what he was doing. He actually stayed there to listen. And here's what the man said. I was there when he said this, and my translator shared this with me. He said, I know that these gods aren't real. They don't answer our prayers. I have been a priest of this God like my father. These gods are empty, but the God you're telling us about is a living God. I would like to come to worship that God instead. We were completely floored. And so we gave him a copy of the New Testament in his language and began to share with him. And it struck me, Noah, that in this moment, on this particular day, and this was not the only thing that happened that day, this is a very full day, I can tell you that. Here we were sitting in a village that the literal ramifications of idolatry had resulted in a possession and then a deliverance. And in the angering of many of these young men who looked to their elders to have us cast out, but whose elders knew there was something of substance to what we were sharing with them in their own experience. More than that, the very priest of that town confessed, I know this isn't legitimate. I know this isn't right. The God you're talking about must be the real God. And he didn't just say this offhandedly. He's going to pay a social price for saying this. And he knows that. And so does everyone there who comes to hear the gospel and believe. They are shunned, are not able to marry, they lose their social status, and it is technically illegal to be a Christian in Nepal. So there is possible jail time and things like that. And so having witnessed this demonic deliverance and then the deliverance of this Hindu priest, I had concluded, wow, there really must be something to this. And once again, God had answered my prayer, very specific prayer to be involved in something like this. I just could not deny that. And there's many more things that happened just that day, let alone the other 10 days that I could tell you about, which confirm what I'm sharing with you. But I was a witness and a participant. I myself am a Westerner. I'm very skeptical. I look for medical reasons, diagnoses. My father is an ER doctor. That's how I look at things. But when I was in this village, it was very clear. There were spiritual forces at hand that were going on. And even the insiders to that religion knew that was true and that they didn't want any more part of that.
Wow, that sounds like a story straight out of the Book of Acts right there, but being experienced today by Nick Ward over here. That's
Seen it.
awesome. And you've seen it, yes. Something I wanted to recommend too for those who eat up stories like this, or maybe you just want more of it. I actually have a book. This is actually by J.P. Moreland's. His scholarships and great. He's actually more of an apologist, but he really found interest in the topic of miracles, and there's stories like this in this book that quite frankly would probably blow you away, just like some of these stories. So I highly recommend this book. I actually got to meet JP. He actually signed the book for me, Nick. If you take a look right there,
Oh,
from
really? Is
JP
that?
Moreland. Yeah, he spoke at my church, so I got to shake his hand and meet him. In responding to miracles with doubt, or with skepticism, if you will, what advice would you give to what general advice would you give in terms of strengthening our faith that God is performing miracles and doing things in our lives, and how do we almost unlearn the overtly naturalistic side to our
Hmm.
thinking, where the compass is always going to point.
Sure. Well, it's funny you asked that because I noticed every story I shared with you started with prayer.
Hmm.
And prayer is a private and personal thing. Um, I think we'd be hard pressed to find something more compelling than, if this is true, that God who has made you exists and knows you personally, knows what kinds of things you actually need. Um, to approach a God like that gives us great confidence that we could ask very specifically. When you read the New Testament, we are called to ask, seek,
Hmm.
knock, according to Jesus' teaching. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. And then later on it says, you have not because you do not ask, in James' epistle. And so I find that one of the things that is good to just recommend as your own personal experiment, why don't you write down some very specific prayers and pray them for a week and see what God might do? Because one of the things I'm learning personally is I don't think I'm bold enough. If the Bible describes a God who genuinely loves us so much, he would send his own son to die for us. And then if that's the best he can give us, his own son, how much more, Paul concludes in Romans, might he give us anything else? Would he give us everything else? And so it's not a tall order for me to ask something from God if he's already given me the very best thing he could give me when I didn't ask. And so I would encourage anyone who listens, including myself and Noah, we need to be more bold in our asking. We don't want to ask general things that if they were answered, we wouldn't even know it. We want to ask a God who's real and who lived among us, who understood what it's like to be human, the desires and the quandaries we find ourselves in. We can come to that throne of grace with boldness to ask for grace and help in our time of need, says Hebrews 4. We ought to take him up on his offer. He doesn't lack the resources. He doesn't lack the care. He doesn't lack the desire to do good. It says that God is like a good father who knows how to give good gifts to his children. And I'm personally, as a person who's still learning this, I know every time I have asked in that spirit, God has answered me. Now, that doesn't mean every prayer request I've ever answered has ever or asked for has ever been answered. And I'm happy that not every one of them has been answered. We're not that good at prayers, and it could have been much better. And in terms of, I was asking for this, I should have been asking God for this because God could handle this. So I would just encourage you, do you have a friend who's sick? Pray for them. Do you have someone who's suffering? Pray for them. Do you see a need where there are resources you cannot meet on your own? Pray for it. Specifically, boldly, and call God to account. Here's something I finish with. The God of the Bible is not a person who seems to be offended at our taking him at his word. If God says, for example, I really love the poor, or I really want everyone to come to know me and not to perish. When we pray, we could say, God, you said, this is what you said about you. Now, I'm praying this way because I think this is what you're like. I think God likes to be taken to task on those things, taken up, that is, on his word. And we could be a little bit more bold. Think about Moses when he prayed. God said, I want to wipe these people out. These guys are just bent on destroying themselves. They're going to take everyone down with them if I don't do something. And Moses goes, but you know what, though? Wouldn't it be better, God? Can I just say this, God? That you didn't destroy them, because then everybody else will think that you just forsook them. And it says God changed his mind. We don't live with an impersonal Greek God that doesn't care, doesn't listen. Our God hears people and is moved by them at times to do the things they've asked. Do I want to regret all the prayers I didn't pray? Or do I want to find out if all the ones I do pray can be answered? I think I want to choose the latter, and I hope that you do too.